All right, it looks like we just had a good language lesson from Jess on how to incorporate Anishinaabe into our Zoom usage or our online usage of video conferencing. In the past year and a half, we've obviously been making some adjustments with the pandemic, and Jess was nice enough to share some language lessons relevant to the technology that we're using these days. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the last day of our Treaty Week. We've had a great week. We've had a lot of attendance. Our preliminary numbers show I think we've had over 1,000 viewers yesterday. If I'm not mistaken, I believe we had somewhere in the neighborhood of about 30-40 classrooms. I think I see some classrooms online today, including one of my own alumni from Lockerbie Composite School, so shout out to the students over there. Go Vikings!
Go Vikings!
Yeah. So my name is Bert O'Keefe, and I'm a senior policy analyst with Robinson Huron, Wawinda-McGeewin. And I'm fortunate enough today to be joined by some of our Ogimaak. I understand in addition to the 4 chiefs that I have with me here today, we have Chief Sayers joining us from his home community in Batchewana. So I want to say I'm very honored to be able to facilitate today's discussion, and many of these Gima and Ogimaak I've been fortunate enough to work with for over about 12 years now, and I think the furthest memory I have back that I have working with these individuals would be Chief Sayers, and it was during the HST protest in Toronto in around 2010, I believe that was. So I'll introduce everyone today. To my immediate left, we have Chief Alo, or Chief Al Oswimke, I apologize. I've known Alo on a personal level for quite some time, so I am used to calling him that. But today you're Chief Oswimke to me, and of course you're from Sagamuk, so welcome. Next to him we have Chief McLeod from Nipissing First Nation. Then we have Jerry Duquette from Chief of Dokees First Nation, and on the end, rounding out our presence here, we have Chief Tobogganam from Wissahickon First Nation, and again we have Chief Sayers on the line. Honey, Chief Sayers, can you hear us okay? I think we've still got you on mute there.
He's talking.
Oh, the sound doesn't seem to be coming through. Oh, there, but now I can hear you.
Can you hear me? No, shut. Can we
Good morning. We can hear you good. So I'm going to do a little bit of an intro to the panel, and then we'll get right into the questions. Again, my name is Bert O'Keefe. I'm a senior policy analyst. And along with some of the staff, such as Earl Commando, who's our executive director, and Sam Manitowabi, we've been tasked with looking at a governance structure for the Robinson Huron Treaty area. And for quite some time, our leadership and our citizens have been gathering at annual treaty gatherings to honor the treaty anniversary, which takes place on September 9th. And this work has been going for quite some time, and the establishment of the Robinson Huron Wawinda-McGeewin Secretariat was meant to take a look at how we organize ourselves from a treaty governance perspective. And so today's an opportunity for us to have some discussion around that. When we do talk about things like the collective, I may reference the collective, and that just means our collective efforts. We're still looking at how we're defining that space, and so some of our comments today are where our current thinking is at. Some of our leadership have differing perspectives, and over the next while we'll be reconciling that, and that will be part of some of our questions today. So I'll get into my first question. Why are we pursuing treaty governance, and what's the significance of treaty governance, and what might be your vision be? So maybe I'll start with you, Chief Tobogganam, on the end, and let you comment on the importance of treaty governance.
Well, again, miigwech, and before I respond to the question, I'd just like to say miigwech to the Gimas that I sit with, and as well our 17 other Gimas that are participating virtually, and as well Chief Dean Sayers. I know you're virtual, and again, it's a new way that we do business. But just to say, miigwech for the invite, miigwech for the information of that's come throughout the week. So wanted to say that much first, and of course, Ani Bojo, Orange Water Indishnakas, Wissahickon Donjaba, like Dodam, Anishinaabe Ninda. Like to as well acknowledge the Creator for this beautiful day. There's great need for governance within our treaty region. Certainly, I think that from my perspective, I see it with an understanding that we are one family, and that we've had many processes in history, in our history, that we can draw upon when it comes to governance. Certainly one of the potentials is again understanding our clan system within that one family. So again, I believe that we need to move in those directions, and as we speak and share within the group of chiefs, we also know that our geographical areas are somewhat a little bit different, and the conditions of the resources are different as well. So, Wasauksing's part of the southeastern portion of the treaty area, treaty region. And of course, we have different conditions. We have a lot of encroachment in our area, lots of development from the south. So again, there's great need. We need to protect our lands. We need to protect our interest, all the resources, and also that relationship with creation. So I'll say that much. I say miigwech for that first question, and again, thank you for the invite. Chimiigwech.
Miigwech, Chief Tabamadang. Does anyone else want to add onto that? Does anyone have any strong opinions about why we're pursuing this treaty governance? It looks like Chief Duquette's all teed up here, so I'll turn it over to you.
I think when he talked about family, I know we discussed it earlier, and even though we're a family, sometimes in our family we don't all get along. And not to say that our nations don't get along, but I think it's a good point to say that as a whole of the Robinson-Huron Treaty, we might come to a consensus, but sometimes our own nations may have a different opinion on how we do protection of lands or how we protect our resources. So every individual First Nation will have the right to make sure that our nations or our members' voice, our citizens are heard. And I hope that we can all at the end get along or make sure that it goes smoothly. So I just want to add that, yes, we're a family, but we want to protect our own nations too.
Mm-hmm. Chief McLeod, did you want to add on that?
Miigwech, Maninkina. It's really important for us to get in, I'll use the term, get back into treaty governance, because we've been essentially marginalized for the last 150 some years from the obligation of the treaty. And if we look back in history at the the very beginning of when we started the treaty process with the newcomers, it was always taken as a living breathing document that wasn't merely an event in time, but it was what our forefathers had set up with the newcomers to continue that relationship in a good way. And the corporate knowledge of treaties and the reason behind treaties has always been maintained by the Indigenous people, but for many reasons, the colonizing nations that came here, their corporate knowledge seems to have somewhat been watered down to a point where we are today, where we're still in court fighting about treaty issues. And I would challenge any political representatives of Canada or the province of Ontario or any other province to be able to explain to me the treaties and the treaty processes and what they meant. And I think we would be hard pressed to find any of those political leaders to know anything about those treaties. So the corporate knowledge on one side has really been lost, and I think it's incumbent upon us as leaders today to restore that relationship, because that's what it is. It's a living relationship between the colonizing governments and our nations. So it's very important. I heard Chief Tabamadang talk about the importance of the protection of our lands from the different stresses that we have. And you know, one of them that's serious, that's being talked about in Glasgow right now is climate change. And you know, we have to also look at how that's going to impact us and impede us moving into the future. So there's many issues that we have to discuss, but I think most importantly, we have to get colonial governments back to understanding what the treaty means and what that relationship requires. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Chief. I'm going to get into the next question here, and I think you guys did a good job of explaining why we're pursuing our treaty governance approach. Traditionally, when we gather as large groups in these collective spaces, the decision-making process is often followed by a Robert's Rule of Order, or it's, you know, the decisions get affirmed by resolution. Since joining the team at RHW and helping our leadership and in our communities move towards this treaty governance, we're trying to figure out what that model for decision-making looks like and what that space could look like. Maybe I'll turn this one over to you, Chief Sayers. I know that you've been a member of our political working group and providing a lot of guidance, so maybe you could share some perspectives on what that decision-making model could look like. Miigwech.
Good morning, everybody, again. Yeah, thanks for the question, Barrett, and Chiefs, thank you for your input and your observations on that first question, and I concur. And when I think about how we govern, how we work together, I think about our inheritance that we have as a people. When we entered into the agreements with new people to our lands, it was from the perspective that we are unextinguished nations that have our own land, our own language, our own law, our own people, and our own spirituality. And when we met, we had our own governance, our own decision-making processes, which were weighted heavily in our spirituality, and we relied heavily on our input from our ancestors and spirit. And we never governed ourselves under the settlers' colonial systems. And everything that we did as a people was recognized, and it was respected as far as the positions that we took. And those were born through our own indigenous systems. And that's who we are. And it's a challenge for us as leaders today to be able to capture the essence, the spirit of those really beautiful governance systems in how we make decisions today. And even when we look at the relationship we have with the new governments on our lands around treasury relationships, are getting our share of our money that the Crown holds, they put all these expectations, like we have to be incorporated or we have to whatever kind of processes that are really colonial processes. And we said, no, when it was treaty time, we didn't have to do all that. You just pay your bills, pay your rent. And those kinds of foundational, logical nation-to-nation relationships are where we're working towards. And they don't include those processes that are like Baird was saying around the Robert's Rules of Order. We have our own ways of governing based on a consensus model, based on the voices of our clan systems and the different major clan groupings, and including spirit and including pipes. And I think we're trying to get and find a balance and get towards a reflective indigenous governance system. And we are at the same time within this modern governance expectation and I guess contractual relationship with the Crown. So there is a balance. We have to in the meantime work within both systems, but I can see us completely evolving and working from the worldview that I think our ancestors would have hoped we would be embracing today.
Miigwech, Chief Sayers. Sort of to expand on your response, as you know, one of the things that we did this year in Chief Sayers was the host community for our treaty gathering this past September. And this, I understand, was the first gathering where we reached out, I guess is one way to say it, and asked for a space to be created for us, and that was the lodge. That was Mike Najawan help us, I guess, bring into that, or bring that lodge to us, because it is a living being, to join us for that gathering. And a number of the chiefs that are here today were able to make it over to Bawating and join us in that lodge. And so sort of maybe to help expand off of Chief Sayers' comments is, maybe I'll turn it to Chief Oswimke here and ask you, what was different about coming to that lodge space and looking at things a little bit differently in terms of moving towards more of a traditional approach to our decision making?
Mino, Kanawaya, Gerga, and keeping us and vision cause, Quad and Dodum, Skumuk, don't you? I introduced myself as Spirit. I'm Spotted Thunderbird of the Bear Clan. I live in Skumuk. Coming into this responsibility, relatively new, although I've been around the forum for a number of years, going back into the 90s, and being aware of a lot of the discussions and leading us to where we're at today, and observing, I guess, from an administrative perspective. One of the things that I was challenged with is looking at matters through a certain lens. I'm not going to deny that that perception of what we were dealing with was in fact through a colonial perspective, because that is how I was taught growing up in the institutions that I attended, right from elementary school all the way into secondary, post-secondary. And what that created was a challenge for me in time as well too, and there were also life experiences that led me to look at things a certain way. And looking at things in a certain way that I always thought that things had to be done in a very, with certain protocols in relation to a corporate perspective. That created a challenge for me coming into this responsibility, because although I was aware to some degree of the significance and the importance of ceremony and doing what we do, it left me a lot to learn and attempt to understand and try to break through those barriers of looking at things through that colonial perspective. I had difficulty with connection to spirit, understanding and hearing, intuition through which spirit speaks to us. So attending the lodge this fall was significant, because I'll go back 1 year coming into this responsibility for the community. What was significant was that I came in thinking that I was going to do things a certain way, and it didn't happen that way. I was guided through intuition, through to do things through ceremony. And in Ogimaak, that's what we have done at our leadership table, and I start to see the significant and the impacts throughout the community, impacts in a very positive way with the guidance, support, and direction of ceremony. We do ceremony often. We do ceremony for much of the things that we do. We ask for permission before we do things, and we ask for that guidance through ceremony when we're doing the things that we're doing. I attended the Robinson Huron Treaty commemoration Treaty Week last year, being new into this position and responsibility. I was conflicted because in Ogimaak, many are aware of our involvement in the resource extraction industry sector with the mining companies. There are some who look at that activity in a way that may be contrary to our responsibilities as Indigenous people. However, I also am aware of why the treaty came to be in the first place. It was because of the resource extraction. And Chief Shingwakos had stated at the time, they need to share the resources with us. And mining was a significant part of that intrusion at that time. Because we know the mines that existed just north of Boating, and the mines and the mine that existed just east of Boating. So those were significant factors that led to the discussions around the treaty prior to 1850. Coming into this responsibility, I went into lodge in Boating with that question. The activity that we're doing and engaged in, is it still okay to do that? I went into the lodge and asked the signatories, the chiefs of the Robinson-Huron Treaty, that question. And just to put it in a nutshell, and the response was, yes, continue what you're doing, but know your responsibilities, and as well, don't get greedy. So throughout the year, there was ceremony and much of what we did in our governance in Ogimaak. And coming to the treaty commemoration in Boating again this year, and having that discussion in Lodge, I felt was very significant and very important in guiding us and supporting us and directing us in the governance work that we need to carry out, because a large part of that question is knowing and being aware of what are our responsibilities individually, collectively, and community and as a whole. So I was really encouraged when we began to acknowledge ceremony in the work that we do, because I certainly believe in the power of ceremony and how much it guides us and supports us and directs us.
Miigwech, Chief. That lodge certainly was different, and I remember Ogimaak Sayer saying that we're going to leave that space just feeling a different sense of the direction that we're going in. Does any of our other chiefs want to expand on the feelings or how that gathering impacted you in any way?
Sure. So, as I was talking about earlier, we have to go back to the original ways and thinking of how we look at our relationships and how we look at treaty, and I think by bringing us back to the lodge gives us a good foundation for the proper mindset to be moving forward in looking at rekindling that relationship with the non-Indigenous government and getting back to the real true meaning, spirit, and intent of those treaty gatherings. And you can't get that at a boardroom or in a hotel facility. That we have to be more grounded and connected to the lands that we're talking about here, and that's our treaty territory. So I found it very fitting and quite comforting to be in a lodge rather than in a more colonial environment like we are today.
Miigwech. Anyone else want to expand on that? Chief Tabano, I see you leaning forward there.
Just again, a couple of little comments. When we've heard our elders say many times is that, when we use those colonial ways of, even using this, the paper, we know that it's not our way, and we use a foreign way of describing on paper. And we've heard our elders say that that's not our way. And we need to use our Anishinaabe-Moan, we need to use our practices to to really, really be productive. You know, when we use those colonial ways, it makes it hard. We struggle with that from time to time. And again, just taking the advice from our elders in regards to using our own processes, using our Anishinaabe to describe and understand. So again, just to add those comments.
Miigwech, Chief. We've talked about the why we're looking at this governance structure. We've talked about potential ways that we can do a decision-making process, and we're still figuring those items out. But another area I think that we have to have a discussion around is what our treaty decision-making matters, or what are these things that we have to come together as a collective from a treaty perspective to address certain topics. And I think some of them, Scott, you touched on climate change. Does anyone want to expand on what they feel are priority areas? And I'm just looking at my list of who's spoken recently. Maybe you can turn that over to, I see Chief McLeod, you want to jump in? So.
For priorities?
Yep.
Yeah, so, you know, it's, the priority list on issues is huge for things that we need to do. But I think there's a couple things that we have to really key in on that are more immediate than perhaps others. The first being, of course, you know, the fulfillment of the treaty itself is huge, and you know, we are in some legal proceedings currently for some aspects of the treaty, but we have to continue. There's more than just annuities. But I think one of the main priorities right now is you know, what the government calls crown land, and you know, which is really a misnomer because it's not crown lands. It was never ceded. So we have to look at those as treaty lands that we discussed in the treaty, and we had provisions on how we would share those lands. Somewhere along the line, you know, federal and provincial governments assume jurisdiction over that, and they call it crown lands. But in fact, any unoccupied lands, you know, needs to be negotiated with the treaty nations within the treaty area. It hasn't been ceded, therefore it's not theirs to negotiate with other interested parties, whether it be you know, outside of our treaty area, First Nations or Métis groups or any of that stuff. It's not theirs to negotiate away. In fact, it's for every use that you know, they want to utilize within our territory. Every single use needs to be negotiated. It needs to be agreed upon by the nations, and that was the true spirit and intent of the treaty and our relationship. So I think, you know, this whole idea of crown lands, or as we refer to them as treaty lands, is a priority because it's not growing, it's only shrinking, and we have to you know, assert our jurisdiction over those lands. As Chief Ogimaak Sayers has always said, you know, if you think you own that land, show us the receipt, because there, you know, there is none. And we have to be firm on that, because, you know, the land isn't growing, it's shrinking, and we need to assert our jurisdiction sooner than later on that.
We got you. Chief Duquette?
No, thank you, Bert. And I think part of that priority for me, I've been fortunate the last couple of years, is attending schools and actually going to them and part of that education to show what inherent right and treaty rights are, and how they benefit from other treaty, as everyone, the newcomers are treaty people. We gave them the right or the responsibility to share this land, to take care of it, and I think it's a big part of it. je peux parler en français parce que quand j'étais à l'école Saint-Antoine, c'était toujours ça dans les livres qui apprenaient que qui était les Premières Nations, qui était là-bas. So when I went to school, it was in French, and it was always the reverse of who treaty was and why, and that we were put on this land, and this is what we were stuck there. And I think it's now the realization that no, a lot of the history books were wrong, and what they taught in school was totally the reverse. And I think we have a great opportunity. I know that Chief McLeod has been going to schools also and showing people, occupy that land, be there. This is our territory. We're not just stuck in our little parcel or little note stamps here. That we have to occupy the land. We have to be in a respectful way, yes. But I think that misconception of no, you can only hunt, fish on your First Nation or in or around your First Nation, but we gave you treaty rights. We already had it. We have our here, right? So my big part is to educate the young ones that they know, and basically sometimes they tell me, I think your history books need to be thrown away, and we're right here to we're living, and that's part of us to make sure that our children know the truth about it, that the treaty is a living document, and we're still here.
Miigwech. Chief Sayers, I know it's a little bit of a challenge for you to give me visual cues that you'd like to speak next, so I just want to give you an opportunity if you want to just expand on that.
Sure, thank you, Chiefs, and I completely agree. There's that's definitely a priority. That's part of our inheritance as a people, that we have to look after those lands, and those lands that we're talking about are actually from our recollections, from our elders, from our version of the treaty. Those are lands that are held in trust with the Crown for the sole benefit of us as a people. And throughout our territories, we have a reserved right to be able to do those things that we're in the habit of doing. And that can be interpreted in so many ways. If you recall, when we were lowered here, when we were placed here as a people, we inherited so many obligations, so many responsibilities, and we maintained those through history, and we still have that inheritance. We never gave away our inherent obligations to creation and to the Creator. And as a result of that, when we entered into this treaty, it was only out of necessity to share a little wealth, a little resources, but we never gave the new people 100% carte blanche ability to do whatever they wanted throughout the territories. So like Chief Scott was mentioning in our recollections, when we look at the treaty, is there anything in there about the trees? Is there anything in there about the water? Is there anything in there maybe in a general sense about fisheries? Is there anything in there? All those jurisdictions that we inherited, if they're not in the treaty, by default, what Canada says, if they're not in the treaty, they're ours. But actually, you just don't assume something. That's an illegal assumption. We maintain all of those jurisdictions before the treaty, during the treaty, and after the treaty. We never succumbed. We never gave them those things. So we have to reassert. And that's the challenge that we're finding right now, is all of those resources, all of those different types of jurisdictions are illegally being asserted and managed by the settler governments, and all the revenues that come with that are being held by them. And we don't have the capital, the infrastructure to be able to properly manage according to our inherent obligations and responsibilities. We're working on it. We're looking at transfers. We're looking at resourcing and revenues to be able to do that. And in the meantime, the chiefs, and it's really comfortable to see that we are starting to get where we need to be with the formation of the Secretariat, starting to have some preliminary discussions around overlapping jurisdictions, overlapping challenges with different neighboring groups, including the assumptions that the provincial and the federal government makes. We are working through those foundational issues, and we've actually set up our Wawindimagiwin, our organization, to help us administratively work our way through these issues. And they're already naturally starting to come to the forefront, these issues. Land is really an important issue. We're hearing a lot of concern about the moose population and the aerial spraying with forestry. And those are definitely within our realm. They are still within our jurisdiction. We have to reclaim and reassert, and all the animals and the trees and the plants and the forest, everybody's looking to us. All of our relatives are looking to us to intervene and once again assume our inherent responsibility. So we are working on it. We are working through some priorities, and we have to be careful because we don't have the resourcing. We don't have the capacity, but we're getting there. it's moving. We've moved strides. If you looked at where we were 30 years ago to where we are today, there has been a tremendous amount of growth, and it's I think it's really great to be a part of that.
Miigwech, Chief. So we've talked about what some of these priorities could look like, and I want to come back to something that you said, Chief Oswimke, is the reflections that you've had around the work your community's doing in terms of economic development and creating opportunities for your community members to be able to put a roof over their head and put food on their table in these contemporary times. And your community's made an active decision to pursue some of these developments with industry partners or resource development. At times, though, I know that there's been conflicts over that path, and sometimes we may disagree at the community level, or disagree with each other on what the parameters of resource development looks like, or even other tough decisions that we have to make as a treaty area. Could you share maybe some of your thoughts around what you see a dispute resolution process could look like for our treaty area?
I guess at the very core is understanding your responsibilities. We have a responsibility to the land. We have a responsibility to the people. We also acknowledge that there's also shared responsibilities. And when we look at those times and periods when there is in fact dispute or times that we don't agree, it's really understanding what is our level of responsibility in that discussion or in that engagement. And at times we may have to take a firmer approach and just say no. And at times we need to sit down and look at how can we address the matter before us. Historically, we've had our systems of dispute resolution mechanism. And we did them in a way where we sat down and talked about them. And at every chance we avoid having somebody else making that decision for us. Thus is the justice system, the courts, that somebody else is making that decision for us. And with that, there's a danger that not everybody's going to be pleased with the outcome of that decision. And most often, not everybody is. So when we sit down and look at matters of where we don't agree, it is always best just to sit down and look at how can we resolve and work through this in a way that's mutually acceptable to both sides of that dispute or that discussion. So we've had the historical means of addressing that. In times there were decisions that had to be made in the best interests of all. And in our particular case, we always endeavor to resolve through mutual means and benefit.
Miigwech. Anyone else want to expand on what a dispute resolution process could look like?
Yeah, sure. I'll take a poke at that one. We do in our culture have ways of dealing with such issues, and I think this is where the wisdom of elders comes into play, and looking to perhaps a circle or council of elders to bring any types of disputes and getting that kind of guidance from a higher knowledge level to our nations, I think is one way that we can look at resolving any type of disputes. But I think consensus building is, as Chief Duquette talked about earlier, is crucial to minimizing those types of disputes, and as he said, it's not something that we're always going to agree on, but there are things that we can agree on, and start to build that consensus. And but I think definitely using and our youth as well, using input from youth councils and elder councils to find solution to those things. But I think the fundamental message here is that it's us that decides. As Chief Al spoke of it, it can't leave our hands. It has to stay within our nations, and it's our problem, and we have to find solution.
Does anyone else want to expand on the topic of conflict resolution or dispute resolution?
Yeah, if I may, I think we have an opportunity amongst us that we don't have that same criteria as here's 30 days to respond to it, and we're doing it or it's not going. I think we meet priority, we gather, and I think even consulting or a notification amongst our nations is a lot broader. We have it on the table, and we can connect a lot better than and I'm not saying they don't connect, but the different governments don't talk to each other, and sometimes they come into conflicts. And if they would just sit down and sit at the table, and like it was mentioned, sit and discuss it, those can be hashed out right away before you even go into a project, or if you go into an agreement. I know for us, for our hydro project, we sent notification, we invited people, and it was in around all our nations throughout the corridor, and people were aware of it before we even started. So I think we have that opportunity amongst our nations. If we're going into any business venture or any changes with our nation, we sit down and say, hey, pick up the phone, it's a quick text, and ahead of time. So it stops that, actually, those conflicts, because we're all made aware of it, and we're all very well connected in amongst our different meetings. So I think it's a big part of not having disputes. We know about it before.
Mm-hmm. I agree, and I'm glad you brought up government, because there's a big theme of reconciliation these days, and that we have to reconcile our relationship with government. But it seems that at times we have a difference of opinions with the Crown, not just on what we need to reconcile and how we reconcile those items, but even what does reconciliation look like. But in terms of our treaty, there's definitely been different perspectives on what the treaty means. How do we reconcile our differences? And I know that we're doing that in some ways already, but I'm curious if anyone wants to expand on what that means. Well, we'll turn it over to Chief Sayers. I see your hands up.
Okay, well, thank you. I just wanted to make a quick comment, and I can probably make a comment in regards to reconciliation with the newcomers to our lands, but I do support the involvement of elders and youth. And what I wanted to say was that we have in our communities a wide array of different types of elders that have different expertise in different areas. Like, we don't have a one size fits all elder. So I think in how we design a process would have to reflect that. Maybe look within each one of our villages to see if there's somebody that we would recommend to be a part of this group, to be able to come up with ways of resolving some of those disputes. We as a people have evolved, and we are amenable, we are pliable, we're resilient, and we can evolve, and we can create beautiful structures based on inherent knowledge, some of the good stuff that we might see in our world today that we could incorporate into that process and come up with a really incredible resolution process incorporating spirit, including not only elders, but the same type of premise with our youth. So thank you for those comments and thoughts in regards to dispute resolution. Reconciliation, I think, is going to happen whether or not we give it much energy, because there's natural evolution that's happening. And not only are we pushing that bar for that proper interpretation of the jurisdictional approaches, and I think that's foundational, but also even the settler courts are starting to see, and I don't always embrace the complete decisions of the settler courts, but I think there are some essences that are captured in some of their narratives that come out of those courtrooms. And we are getting closer and closer. And every time there's these positive decisions that are made, those crown governments are forced to align themselves. They're going to be reluctant, but eventually everything that they say that's in confrontation with us will have to be reconsidered, because they're moving in opposition to the tide. They're moving in opposition to the wave. And we are getting closer. I really think there needs to be more education, and our issues are not partisan. They're not owned by a liberal government or conservative government or a new democratic government. They are nonpartisan. They are obligations that Canada, as the administrator of the treaty, has inherited. We have the treaty relationship with the Crown, represented by England. Although Canada's court systems have clouded that by saying the Crown is now represented by Canada and it's indivisible with the province, but at the end of the day, that's not how we envision it. We still see value with the Governor General and representation and meeting with the Queen. So we kind of see a different approach to where we're going to find the eventual spirit and intent met by the governments that are now on our lands. And I think we have to work from a similar page, but it has to be, I think, spirit-based and in recollection of our inherent jurisdiction and rights that we never gave up in any treaties. And we're on the side of right here. And I know when I go into those foreign courtrooms, they are definitely afraid that they are going to lose. And at the end of the day, what's been happening is they withdraw their charges against us because they can't afford to lose. Eventually, that's going to change, and it's going to change naturally. That would be my comment in regards to the reconciliation.
Does anyone want to expand further on the topic of reconciliation, particularly with the Crown and related to our treaty?
Well, I think I spoke about it earlier, and I think that's, if we look back right to the Royal Proclamation 1763, and then, the Covenant Chain Treaty of Niagara in 1764, it really established the baseline for the treaty relationship, and really it was the relationship that should be put first, not the treaty. The treaty was just a mechanism in which we honored our relationship, and the original belt was referred to as a wooden chain, and then became an iron chain, and then eventually, because of the value of that relationship, it became a silver chain, which needed to be polished every year and shined, and that was obviously, metaphorically speaking, keeping that relationship in good order and making sure that there was no issues throughout this. And that's what made it the living treaty, was that it was revisited all the time and made sure that there was a mechanism there to for government and our nations to be able to resolve issues before they became big. But as I mentioned earlier, that corporate knowledge of that relationship over time, as we went from different governor generals and ministers of Indigenous affairs and all that, as we came to where we are today, that corporate knowledge of that relationship and the importance behind it has been really watered down, if not forgotten at all. Except on our side, we do know the importance of it, and we do know the process that we followed and why it was a living treaty. So reconciliation is the basis for reestablishing that corporate knowledge to those modern day ministers and governor generals and all of those important political figures on the colonial side, to really know, because it's not just a relationship, but it's legally binding in their own laws, as we're seeing unfold before our eyes, in provincial courts and federal courts. So reconciliation is involving, educating the leaders of the non-Indigenous side to fully understand our relationship and honor that relationship. So it's the basis of moving forward, and it's unfortunate that some of it has to be forced through their own court systems, but one way or another, reconciliation needs to happen, and obviously it would be better if we had willing participants on the other side. So without getting into that too much, you know, that is key to reestablishing the relationship between our nations and the current federal and provincial governments.
Go ahead, Chief.
When we, excuse me, when we speak about reconciliation, at times there's, because of the historical influences, impacts on us as Indigenous, as Anishinaabe in this territory and beyond, and through and right across the Big Island, is that reconciliation and perception of, we believe in a lot of ways that reconciliation has to come from them to us. But what we also need to acknowledge as well too is reconciliation from within oneself. I talk about the recovery of the children this summer, and the work in relation to the reconciliation with oneself. They were taken for a specific purpose, to break them from spirit, to take away who they are, our ceremonies, take away traditions, take away language, and disconnect them from their spirit. When we think about what they endured, and those who came home as well too, was essentially a sacrifice. The spirits of those children and those who came home essentially sacrificed. If we're to truly reconcile, it's through honoring the sacrifice of the spirits of the children and those who came home. We think about what the intent was to take away their traditions, their customs, the ceremonies, the language. We honor and reconcile with ourselves when we pick up those ceremonies, when we pick up the awareness and understanding of who we are as individuals, when we pick up and understand and begin the work to learn our language, our languages, then we begin to reconcile within ourselves. Because the thing is, at times when we talk about reconciliation, nobody's going to whack us over the head with the bowl and say, here's your language. No, that work has to come from within. Reconciliation isn't going to give that to us. Reconciliation is going to come from here in order for us to move forward with respecting and understanding the sacrifices that were made by the children and those who came home.
Does anyone else want to expand a bit more on that? Chief Tababna?
Just a couple comments again. You know, when we talk about reconciliation and some of the movement that we're experiencing as First Nations, a lot of it's coming through justice, and there seems to be no political will on the whether it be federal or provincial governments. So again, when we talk about reconciliation, is that the process that the settler nations understand, or is that what they mean by reconciliation through a court process or justice? Again, I really truly believe that we have to see political will from their representatives, whether they're provincial or federal. And you know, again, I think as a First Nation leader, it's very confusing when the settler nations leadership speak that we are their first priority, or that relationship is their first priority, but yet there's no political will. You know, so that has to change. There has to be significant change around the thinking of you know, justice and political will to achieve reconciliation. You know, when I hear the Prime Minister say that's his first priority, our relationship, and then to know that what's happening in the court systems, That's just so confusing for us. You know, they're telling Canadians, Ontarians one thing, but what we're experiencing is a 360 of that. So there has to be political will. There has to be political will. And as our Gimas are saying, the corporate memory has dissolved. And that has to be well understood that, you know, that's imperative. That is imperative when we talk about our relationships with our Indigenous folk of Canada or of Turtle Island. So I just wanted to add that, you know, I often hear the elders again say to us as leaders, as the chiefs, the Gimas, that we are the owners of this land and we must act like it. So those are strong comments from our elders. They motivate us. And again, it really confuses me when we hear on national news a certain message. And as leaders here at this table, we know that's not happening. That's not occurring. So reconciliation is you know, a lot of understanding, a lot of work to do in regards to that. So I just wanted to add a few comments.
Sure. Chief McLeod, I see you want to expand a little bit on that.
Maybe just one last comment on that, if I could. Reconciliation is a human act. It has to come from, you know, your heart, your spirit, your mind. It's a human act. Government is not of flesh and blood. Government doesn't have a spirit. Government doesn't have a heart. And sometimes I think it doesn't have a mind. But so reconciliation can't come from government. Reconciliation has to come from the people who have a heart, spirit, mind. So as long as we keep voting in the humans to run that government machine that have no desire to change the machine, reconciliation cannot happen. So until we start using our mind, our spirit, our heart to put people in those places who have the willingness to change how that machine operates, reconciliation is not going to happen. So it has to start from everybody out there, from all people who vote. You have a voice even if you're not old enough to vote. But it has to come from within of all the people in Canada. And I think, you know, we're starting to see that pinnacle change of reconciliation. And it took, you know, our children, you know, starting with the 215 children, to start to wake us up to the truth, because you have to go through the truth before you can get to reconciliation. And I thank those young children for coming back and assisting us as leaders to start to make that change, to start to shed the light on the truth of what this country was founded on, and move towards reconciliation, to start to change that government machine that is consistently governing through systematic racism, formed government, which was designed to do exactly what it's been doing for the 160 years that it's been in existence. So, miigwech.
Miigwech, Chief. On that aspect of will and keeping things in mind that we're gathered this week and recognizing our treaty, and a lot of our members may not necessarily understand how we can leverage the treaty to get to that reconciliation space, and I think a part of that is we have to reconcile that treaty relationship with Canada. Does anyone want to maybe expand on how we can better educate and inform our citizens, how we can leverage the treaty to I don't know if the treaty is the best way, but maybe if someone wants to expand on our treaty relationship and being able to use that as a piece of reconciliation. Chief Sayers, or do you want to take that one?
We are working on curriculum, but curriculum changes are slow. And I talked to different people from all over the province, and there are so many gaps, and the messages that are being shared are not always aligned with our worldview. And it's really nice to hear that the chiefs are out there actually going to the elementary schools, going to the high schools, going to the post-secondary institutions, colleges, universities, speaking to groups like I've been speaking to the Steelworkers Union here, the Algoma Steel, Tenaris, wherever I can. And I think we keep moving the yardstick. Sometimes we make baby steps, sometimes we make strides, but communication, education, changing the system, those kinds of things. I know at the North Shore Tribal Council, we're working on curriculum, but at the same time, we have to be conscious and cautious of the confines of the curriculum changes as well, because we got to make sure that they come from our worldview within our relationship that is really, really incredibly strong. The way our relationship is designed through our treaty, the Robinson-Huron Treaty, is unlike any other treaty across Canada. We have reserved understandings that are beyond comprehension as far as what we've retained for ourselves. And that isn't always being expressed out there when I look at curriculum, when I look at textbooks, when people share magazines and newspaper articles. So it's really, I think, important for us to be conscious of that, and but focus on the education. I think communication and education is crucial. Our media, we also have invested immensely in the annuities case to properly share perspectives, share thought, try to educate and create awareness. Because like Chief Scott was saying, it's the people out there that have to make the change within their leadership. Their leadership talk, but they have to be forced by their people to actually embrace and take action that's aligned with that talk. And they have to understand that the people and the power that they have as a people out there as well. But at the end of the day, that education around our inherent unextinguished jurisdiction and sovereignty is crucial. And not only sharing that with the settlers, but with our own people. Even our own people will say, oh, we can't do that. We can't break provincial law. Well, that's an illegal law. We have to assert jurisdiction. And we will do that. We will assert our law, our unextinguished natural law-based types of processes. And we have to get to a place where we as a people feel comfortable in our assertion and trust the leadership and trust how we move.
I got the head nod and the feather wave here from Chief Ogimaak, so I'll let you go next.
I want to acknowledge the relationships that we have in Ogimaak and beyond our community, and then those that we work with. More recently, we start to, for different purposes and reasons, corporate interests have been forced to acknowledge us in ways that we've always asserted. More recently, I'm encouraged with the willingness of our business relations coming forth and acknowledging our territories, and as well as even asking for guidance and support through ceremonies that we hold and carry, in supporting them as well too. So without exploiting who we are in our ceremonies, I'm encouraged that and comfortable that what is being done in a respectful way, and that it acknowledges who we are And we start to see the those interests coming forth to ask for that guidance and support from us, because we do carry those responsibilities. Which,
Anyone else want to expand on that topic? I don't see anybody, so I want to kind of, there's a lot of comments around relationship when we were talking about reconciliation, and we have a lot of spaces in relationships with other organizations that support the work we do. One of those is the Assembly of First Nations, Chiefs of Ontario, which is a space that just spent some of my tenure in my career coming out of. While I was at Chiefs of Ontario, we seen one of our fellow regions, which is also an Anishinaabe region, and that's Grand Council Treaty 3. They made a pretty strong statement as to what their relationship is going to look like with Chiefs of Ontario going forward. And it isn't that they want to back away from the rest of the regions of Ontario. In fact, we've been doing a lot of relationship building with Grand Council Treaty 3. Ogimaak Kavanaugh was at our treaty gathering in September. He's invited some of us to go up and visit his territory. They've been sharing perspectives on their approaches to treaty governance. And so they're looking more to build direct relationships with the other regions in Ontario. In addition to the Chiefs of Ontario and Assembly of First Nations, we also have the PTOs. And in fact, in our region, there's a number of PTOs that our communities participate in those spaces. In addition, we have our tribal councils. So there's a lot of relationships that we have, and as we move forward from this treaty perspective, is there some kind of reconciliation we have to do with those spaces, or do we need to look at how we have those relationships with those other entities? I don't want to say governing bodies, because that's not what they are. So who would like to take first crack at that question? I see you moving ahead, Scott. So
Sure. So I think, to start with, we have to understand, why these organizations were created in the first place. And I think, one of the fundamental reasons that we've created these organizations is to interface with government, because we didn't seem to have a mechanism that fit their way of doing business. So we created these entities that essentially are carbon copies of the Jaganash and the non-Indigenous way of doing things, which are have value. But I think we kind of how important the treaty is to us. We kind of put that aside, and we put all our ducks for a period of time into those types of advocacy groups, because that corporate knowledge that I talked about that government has lost, they didn't place any value in those treaties. So the only way we could essentially talk about those grievances and issues was to create these organizations that they recognized. It more or less did us a disservice at the time, because now our treaty is way below, and we need to elevate our treaty up to the forefront, because that's the most important relationship that we have. If I could quote the Prime Minister, is the relationship government to government, which is based on those treaty relationships. So there is still a lot of value in having the political organizations working for us, because that's exactly what they do. They work for us. So they can't get ahead of us. They're not the rights holders. They're not the title to landholders. When we look at the relationship and the groups of nations that are signature to those treaties, those are the rights holders. Those are the title holders to the lands that they occupy. So we just need to do a bit of a shift to place the treaty nations in the front and on our wings, helping us guide through the process of negotiating with government and talking about issues that we have are these PTOs. They're still very useful, but we just have to really align ourselves. It's like anything. You have to set it up to work in your favor. So you don't put the cart in front of the horse, right? So this is how we have to look at things. We have to re-establish that order of importance and their place. All of these organizations have a place to assist us, but where that proper place is what we need to figure out. And we always need to put those relationships, government to government, nation to nation, in the forefront.
Very much. Chief Duquette?
No, I totally agree. And if you look at the logo, we're all holding hands here. But within the Robinson-Huron, a lot of these nations are not part of these PTOs or tribal councils, or they may even be independent. And I think there's a loss sometimes when we go to, they do great work, as Chief McLeod said, but sometimes there's that disconnect. That means there's a couple of people here not holding hands or not standing shoulder to shoulder. So I truly believe in our treaty chiefs being as one to move those yardsticks, to be that forefront, to be able to speak on behalf of our nations all together as a collective. Because I mentioned some are not part of it, and we're missing out, and they are missing out, and I don't think that's our way of leaving someone behind. So,
Yeah, very much, Chief. I'm going to come to you, Chief Oswimke. I know your community's been very vocal on their approach to these relationships with these organizations, so I'll let you share a bit on that.
We have to understand that when we pursue some of these opportunities for advocacy, the underlying thing is financially who's carrying that. And when we look at the terms and conditions around such that we carry out some of that activity, there's always that conformance, there's always that accommodation to those who are footing the bill to carry that. And I think that in order for us to truly begin to identify the work that we need to do is to begin to corrode that conformity, corrode that accommodation. And how do we do that? How do we begin to carry ourselves? Because much of what we do is in fact on in a process of, I have to be careful with my words here, because the process under which we accommodate is through provisions of agreements, and that is through the public purse, if you will. I'm really struggling with my words here, because a lot of what funds that in fact comes from the benefits of the treaties. However, we still accommodate through the provisions of those agreements and those funding processes. So when we begin to understand exactly how we can do the work necessary without having to conform to provisions, and then we can start to identify how we can begin to do the work that's necessary.
Good question, Chief. Does anyone else want to expand on that? I know, Chief Sayers, you have a bit more of a different relationship when it comes to PTOs than a number of the communities in the Robinson-Huron Treaty area. I'll let you take a moment to say a few words about that.
Yeah, I appreciate the perspectives that have been shared, and similarly, we out of necessities have created these organizations. They are secretariats, they are supportive agencies, but I find that we've evolved, and maybe we've devolved, but at the end of the day, when we take inventory of where the power lies, it's actually with the First Nations and the chiefs and councils, and there's tremendous power that's aligned with the Robinson-Huron Treaty Alliance that we have. And that's where I find that there's some comfort for our leadership in our villages. We, when I speak to the elders in our communities, they really point towards the importance of the treaty. And not very often do they talk about the Indian Act, almost never. But they remember what we have as people that have a treaty with the Crown, and we have reserved jurisdictions that are captured within that. And that's where we're working from, and we support the Robinson Huron Wawenemagiwin and how we've collectively decided to operate. We are taking inventory of the roles and the mandates of all our related organizations. For Batchwana, we are part of the Association of Iroquois and Allied Indians, and tremendous support we get, and lots of doors open for us through that secretarial organization. And we have, as an example, we have some days in the legislature planned in the next short while to meet with MPs and MPPs. And so there's some value, but I can see us further evolving, not only with our alliance with PTOs, but the Chiefs of Ontario. AFN right now, we're going through a restructuring, and I'm helping out on behalf of the Chiefs of Ontario to make sure that we are clear on what the mandate of the AFN is, as opposed to what we reserved as our mandates as the rights holders that Canada and Ontario have inherited. And sometimes I think we need to tweak and look at how that perspective is embraced by organizations like the AFN. And I still have as one of those key priorities from the chiefs in Ontario, including the Robinson Huron Treaty Chiefs, is that whatever that role might be that we agree to as far as a mandate is concerned with the AFN, that there is an oversight mechanism. Currently, we have the Confederacy chiefs that are the oversight. There is some threats that there's going to be a removal of an oversight like the Confederacy. However, we've insisted that the 133 chiefs level that is going to be maintained, or a like body, as well as looking at the overall evolution of the AFN or devolution of the AFN. So we are going through some restructuring processes at the Chiefs of Ontario. So we are recognizing there's some movement and change that's happening as far as the mandates of the organizations and the relationship with chiefs across the province and across the country. And in particular, I think where we're finding our own comfort based on our own history as a people and as leadership within the Robinson Huron Treaty Territory.
Chief Ogimaak, did you want to add on that?
Sure. Just again, some comments in regards to, treaty, and I just wanted to say that, I come from a family of chiefs. My mother, my grandmother, my grandfather, all chiefs, and I have big moccasins to fill. And one of the things that they always mentioned was that our land, our recognition of the land must be there, must be first, must be foremost. And if we don't have that land, then we have nothing. So of course, treaty, that's where treaty comes in. And of course, treaty must come first. Just as our past leaders of Wissahickon have indicated to me that, that must be number one. And everything else, all of our helpers, our Skralbewis from our organizations, must be aligned to that. As Chief McLeod has mentioned, to help with some of the bigger struggles, and to have that one voice. So again, treaty must, our land, everything comes from that. That's how it was described to me, and it must be number one. So I just wanted to add to that.
Miigwech, Chief. That one voice comment is very suiting given the next question I want to ask. And it's kind of a fun one, and I'm maybe hoping to get some different perspectives on it, but I'm going to pick on you, Chief Duquette, because I don't see as many check boxes or little checks here next to your name, so I want to make sure we're getting to all of our chiefs. When we look at our treaty governance structure, I'll let the cat out of the bag. We do have a draft discussion model. It's something that I worked on based on all the notes that I've read since joining RHW, some of the discussions that we've had with yourselves. I've been fortunate enough to be able to sit with Ogichita Kavanaugh from Treaty 3 and some of his team and the approach that they take to treaty governance up there. Obviously, in Grand Council Treaty 3, they have a Grand Council chief in Ogimaak, Kavanaugh. What do we need for our region? Do we need a single voice? Right now, we work off of, as we move through this draft work that we're doing, we're working with a political working group, which is representatives from the different areas, which we've yet to formally identify. But I'm wondering, Chief Duquette, do we need a Grand Council Treaty Chief or our own Ogichita?
It's a good question to put me on the spot.
It's all just for, like I said, this is just our opinions.
Don't worry,
at
I
this
got
point in time.
I think having a spokesperson that we have right now for one voice as a collective, I think even a representative to make sure that our voices are heard is sometimes difficult as GIMAs to get those meetings or ministers approach. I do believe that when we gather, we do select different individual members to speak on different topics also. It could be that for certain experts or expertise in different areas that they could represent as a collective our members. I think that it's a question to all the chiefs to see what is the relevancy or how we can implement, whether it's a grand chief or a different name to it or a different realization on how we want to interact amongst ourselves and amongst government. So I think maybe I'll leave it up to the other ones to see what is needed, because I'm always here to listen and to observe and to I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's good. Chief?
Well, I think I'm a little more sure. So I originally, Chief Sayers and myself and a few others, were pondering this question for some time now. And I was always of the opinion that, we needed someone, a sole spokesperson that can carry our message, whether it be to our non-Indigenous nation or to media or to however we want to send those messages out, that we needed one person. And that was my original thinking. And after doing a lot of reading on and watching some of his lectures that Alan Corbier has presented over the last decade, and he's done some amazing work and research in this. And the one thing I've come to realize is that they have always done that. When dealing intergovernmentally, they have always assigned one person that would take on that role to communicate their collective thoughts and issues to that, whether it be the Governor General or the Indian Affairs Minister or whoever it was at the time, depending on where in history they were at. So to me, it aligned with my thinking that we do need somebody that is a spokesperson. Now, the caveat to that, I guess, was that person that filled that position had no authority over the nations itself, but were merely just a position of a spokesperson on their behalf, right? So calling it Ogichita or Grand Chief or I don't know, that would have to be decided on what we're comfortable with. But we also have to realize that person, that position, is going to be dealing with the other governments. So we want to give them some resemblance of authority to speak on our behalf. So how we do that, I think, would be up to us as a collective. But I think it's important that we do carry that on.
So you're saying that person's not here to govern us, but here to be that
That's right.
spokesperson?
That's right.
And when there's a strong mandate, that's what they're speaking to?
Correct.
Well, Chief?
Such is not an issue of, it's not title, it's not status, it's a responsibility. And when we go back and think about how did the other chiefs look at Gima Shingwaknos, what was his responsibility to all? Did he speak on behalf of everybody? Did he, was it a collective process? I don't know. Excuse me, but I think these are the things that we need to discuss in terms of how do we approach that very matter. Is do we look at somebody and what are the responsibilities? What is responsibility of the organization? What will that person be doing on our behalf, if such? So, like Chief Duquette, I'm somewhat conflicted on it. However, I do see the need for that collective voice as well too. So, but certainly when we get to that point of discussion on it, I'll certainly be more affirmed in my perspective on it.
Chief Sayers, I see you want to comment on that. Can you go ahead?
Thank you, Miigwech Kamak. Yeah, we've had these discussions over time, and I've really wanted to make sure that we are aligned with our historic, our culture-based, spirit-based types of role that the spokesperson or the chiefs, the leadership, the Kamas utilize, or how we invoke. And the elders in our villages talk about how that's a position that's blessed by our ancestors and the spirits, and when they lift us up. And in our villages here, we have different people that we look to for advice, perspective, positions in regards to fishing, similarly with logging, similarly with education, so we have a number of experts from an Anishinaabe worldview that we try to work with. And we, and that's what I was kind of thinking that maybe we would look towards with Robinson Huron, was that if there's a First Nation that makes up our alliance of the 21, if it's having to do with fisheries, we would look at the First Nation that is really excelling, really doing well, that has expertise, has usage, and has the culture to represent us and speak on that issue. Similarly with whatever issue we might be looking at. But we've had these discussions, and over time and more recently, we've also even further, like Chief McLeod is saying today, recognized that sometimes to be more productive, we could and should have somebody that can be the primary spokesperson, and they would be equipped with the messaging. Maybe they could look to the for in our terms of reference how those messages are evolved at the communities that have the expertise in a particular area, and eventually flowing through a process with the chiefs or the working group to take positions, and depending on necessity at different times. But I can see us still embracing both of those concepts, and having somebody that can be the primary spokesperson that we would look to make sure that they would be able to have that charisma, that really wonderful way of speaking, so that they can ensure that the people can hear and listen to what we collectively say. So there's a number of things that I think we should incorporate into the contemplation and the eventual position that we take, including the meeting with the 21 chiefs that are making up our alliance now, and see what their thoughts are. And maybe that's something that they'd have to take home to their villages and see what the community's thoughts are on that type of a concept. I watch sometimes with the existing roles that are filled by the different grand chiefs in different areas right now, and sometimes I guess we just have to make sure it's designed properly. Otherwise, they kind of step outside their mandates and take us down roads that we haven't given support to. And it's a little scary, but maybe we've learned those lessons, and maybe we can incorporate those into how we might propose the role of a primary spokesperson for the Robinson Huron Wawinemagi and for our people.
Miigwech, Chief. I'm going to switch gears here a bit. I know this was a treaty governance panel, and I think we've covered a number of topics. I am actually going to leave the rest of my questions We are coming close to the end of the time. We did start a little bit late, so we'll go for maybe about another 5 or 10 minutes here. For some of us, we kind of got word that there might be some big news coming this week. And it's anticipated that that news would have arrived this morning while we were talking. It has arrived. We do not know the details of that news, so unfortunately we won't be able to comment on the specifics of what has come out. But the Robinson Huron, as you know, has been in a litigation process now for, geez, a number of years. I think this process started back probably about 10 or 15 years, and Mike Ristol has been a big lead on that. Peter Recollet is one of the plaintiffs. Is actually the individual that reached out to me and said it's okay for us to share the news that something is going to be happening today. Again, we don't maybe know all the details, but the Court of Appeals has made a decision. So maybe I'll turn it over to one of our Gimas to expand on that.
Yeah, so we've been waiting for this decision now for a couple of months, and we are going to be gathering today at noon to discuss what the decision has come to. We don't know the details yet. We do have our legal people deciphering it at the moment, so we will be going to a chief's meeting to discuss that shortly. Also, we have since been working on a petition throughout Ontario for the negotiation of settlement with Ontario, pressuring the Ontario government to come to the table, after the courts have rendered their decision. We all know that they went into appeal mode. We're asking that they come to the table and negotiate. We will be meeting in my territory at 4 o'clock this afternoon in North Bay, the city of North Bay, at MPP Vic Fideli's office in North Bay on Main Street to deliver the petition to negotiate. We have over 5,400 names to that petition. For those of you who don't know, Minister Fideli is the Minister of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade, and he also chairs the provincial caucus. So we will be delivering him that message this afternoon. So if you are in the area, feel free to join us in downtown North Bay to deliver that message. In the meantime, we're going to be waiting to see what the implications of today's decision means, and there will be some media release on that later today once we get through that process. So,
Miigwech. Again, we still don't know the specifics of what that decision is looking like, and we can't comment necessarily on that, but I see your hand is up, Chief Sayers, and I'll turn to you to share the comments that you had before I started this question. But given the timeliness, it's the Friday of Ontario's Treaty Recognition Week, and this is a holiday that was established by the Ontario government, and it is Ontario that appealed the first two stages. What can we anticipate about maybe what the potential of that decision might look like, Chief?
Which Baird, and thank you for your preliminary comments, Chief Scott. I do have a copy, 300 pages, and I haven't had a chance to read it. We are meeting, like Chief McLeod said, we're meeting with the chiefs. We're meeting with litigation management right now, but litigation management committee, and we're going to meet with legal and the chiefs at noon. And we are going to be making larger statements. I believe we have a press conference that we are going to be convening on Tuesday, where we'll have complete reaction, complete statements. Today, we are just making some preliminary comments. We haven't had a chance, and we don't know what's within the confines of the decision, but I'm going to be optimistic just because it is the Friday of Treaty Week, and I think this should be a really complimentary way to finish it off. And I do want to commend everybody for helping us get through another incredible week of activities, once again, through our staff at Ogimaak and all the First Nations and their communications people and their programming staff that have been able to bring light to the issue. And I even spoke on a panel along with a representative and Mike of our legal committee in Thunder Bay at Lakehead University this week. So interest is out there. Canadians want to see resolution, stop wasting taxpayers' money with these appeals that just drying out the process. And I'm looking forward to sitting at that table and finding a resolution to this outstanding annuities issue sooner than later. Miigwech, Bert.
Miigwech, Chief. So on that note, in light of the exciting news that's coming, and that I'm sure these chiefs are excited to go out and find out what this information is. So we're going to start wrapping things up here. Is there any closing comments from anybody, or does anyone have any last minute comments they want to share before we sign off here? I think these guys just want to go hear the decision. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl, who's been our host all week. Miigwech, Cheryl. We're going to keep you updated through our social media as much as we can. I know the Robinson here on litigation team is going to be updating on social media as we get more understanding of what this decision means. So on that note, Miigwech again for the Chiefs. It's been a big honor to have you today and always working with you. So Miigwech from myself and the team at RHW. Over to you, Cheryl.
Very much.
Okay, awesome. Miigwech, Chimiigwech, Ogimaak for our great panel. Always love hearing from our leaders. And Chimiigwech to all our Ogimaaks who participated in Treaty Week this week. There were so many of you in different events, and we're really, really grateful. You know, the number one intention of us having Treaty Week is to learn about our treaty, but to hear from our leaders and all our treaty people.